Hello everyone. So a little while back, I painted this beautiful red cardinal male, and I loved it so much. But I thought maybe I could give it a little companion. So I looked and looked, and finally, in Unsplash, I found this female cardinal. Isn't she beautiful? I liked the vibe of it. She's like looking over her shoulder. Her red feathers have this like pinkish tone, and I don't know, she's just very playful, very colorful beak. And I thought, let's give this one a try. So my painting is almost done. I wanted to show it to you. I feel like the only thing left here would be darken the tail feathers a little bit, add some details to the gray area here, and she'll be ready. The first part of the video will be an introduction and kind of a list of various skills that I used throughout this painting. You'll see me use wet on wet, wet on dry, blooming, some details and mixing on paper, etc. And then there's also extended step-by-step towards the end, so feel free to jump in between chapters, fast forward. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and drop me a comment to see if you enjoy a little bit more of these step-by-step tutorials. I would love to hear from you. Here's a list of the chapters included in this video. First came the swatching. I landed on the Cadmium Red Deep, Yellow Ochre, Tint, and Buff Titanium as a mix in general. Then I did the first layer wet on wet for the main body. For the wings, I tried doing each wing with a different style, wet on wet, and painting each feather separately on the left wing to see which technique I preferred. And then I did the head. I painted the eye with very concentrated tint, and I left some white for the highlight. I later went on with very light wash of tint, so it's not as stark white. I added a little bit of feathers around the eyes, a little bit of feathers around the tip of the head, but otherwise I left it very soft. And finally the background was wet on wet, tint and the orange mixture and some salt to create some blooms for interest. So the colors I landed on are listed in the description of this video. And I did a mix of these three main colors. So first, yellow ochre with some buff titanium at various degrees, and then cadmium red deep with also the buff titanium to make that little soft, like old pink or dusty pink. With more cadmium red, it gave more of the pinkish hue. Cad red, yellow ochre for an orange color, and then for the shadow, cad red and some tint, light. I wet the body of the bird with clean water, the head and the body, excluding the wings, and I started dropping in all my mixes, following what I could see in the reference photo. For the wings, I wanted to try different techniques that I've learned watching a lot of YouTube videos. For the left one, I thought I'll do one feather at a time. Wet on dry, dropping in some dark color with one brush, and then going with another brush with clean water and softening that color almost to like diffuse a shadow. I'm trying to be very careful with that tint color and just keep it very, very diluted, because it can be very overpowering real quick. So this way of doing it one feather at a time is time consuming, but also so relaxing. I'm using a stiff brush to lift some highlights where all these tiny little feathers are meeting. They're like tucked under the main feathers. For the feather on the right, I am wetting the whole surface, and I'll drop in colors to follow the shades that I see on the picture. So a mixture of the pink, a little bit more of cad, and letting the color mix on the paper. This technique is obviously much faster, and the plan is once you let it dry completely, you go back with a little bit of darker tone and outline the shapes. This is a fast forward recording of me working each of those shapes one at a time. I think my opinion about this technique is you can easily get carried away by using too many different colors, at least for in my case. You know, I kept varying between orange and pink and maybe introducing some buff titanium here and there. It's fun. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, if it's too out of place, maybe I'll just give it a nice glazing coat towards the end and tie everything together. Yeah, those tiny, tiny little feathers. I should have used a smaller brush, but I managed. One with clean water and one with paint on it. So here that right wing dried, and I'm going back with some Cad Red and Tint mix, outlining. So we're not painting the feather, we're painting the shadow under the feather to make it pop up and give it some dimension. I think the struggle I had here is to add those tiny little lines going from the shadow up into the feather to mimic like where the feathers separate a little bit. I need to work on that technique. Very early on, I had to do something about the eye. That white space looking back at me was freaking me out. I used some dark tint and I carefully painted. I tried not to go all the way to the edge of like the colored edge. And I left, like I'm leaving a white highlight at the top. Later, when the eye is completely dry, I will go with a little bit of very diluted tint mixture and cover a little bit of that white so it's not too stark. I used the orange mixture I had on my palette from Cad Red and Yellow Ochre to color in the beak wet on wet. And I cheated a little bit and I dropped a little bit of yellow cad yellow at the very top of the beak to show a little bit of highlight. It's not really cheating. I just try to reduce the number of colors I use on a single painting. Cad Red and Tint will give me that little shadow for the beak. And I drew a tiny line right there, just to separate the two shapes. Using that same shadow color, I'm building a little bit of tiny feathers around the eye, just fanning out. And if ever I feel the color is too dark, I go over it with a damp, clean brush. I am trying very hard not to give her a mean look. I mean, I know cardinals are probably the inspiration for the Angry Birds game, but I don't want her to be angry. So I have to apologize that I lost my recording of the process, but I basically started with all wet and wet, and I dropped in tint and the orange mixture. And as it started to slightly dry, I dropped in some salt to create tiny cauliflower shapes for effect. Et voila! I took it outside for a picture. I think next weekend I'll work on adding some lines to the background and maybe a glaze over the tail feathers to make them a little bit darker. And maybe I should have painted the male looking the other way. I should just leave it alone. I'll just not hang them side by side.